Hello, everyone. Peter, thank you for introducing me because I always forget. So at least we're halfway through with that. Today, a really important topic, and actually, I would say it's a topic that's really underestimated for some reason. Why? Because we think that we are serious. We should be serious at work. Businesses should be serious, right? We shouldn't get too emotional. But the truth is that every business is about emotions, right? Why? When we build our company culture, we want people to identify with it. Then we say, okay, we have values, we have a mission, we have a vision, we have a purpose. It's our emotion that gets connected here, right? The same thing is, since we are in the service industry and that's the employer of the future, right? When we talk about our customers, we also want to be customer-centric, right? If we are customer-centric, that means we speak to people's emotions. We want them to identify with our brand. So that means, is there any other way to be true to ourselves than getting a bit emotional? So the question today is, can you figure out the title? I'll get back to it in a second. So let's see, think about it for a minute and let me know. So before we move on, I think you know, you do, okay. Don't tell, okay. So a question to all of you, who uses emoji on a daily basis? Okay, all right, another question. Who thinks we should kind of get a bit careful with emojis because it can get too much? We have emoji pros, so I'm just going to leave the stage. It doesn't make sense. Okay, so the question is it something new or is it something old? Let's go back to ancient Egypt. 4,000 years ago, what did we have? We had hieroglyphs, right? Is it the same thing or is it an innovation? Well, it's totally a different thing, I can tell you up front. Why? Because hieroglyphs 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, they were associated to a certain object or to a certain word. With emojis, we have the space for our interpretation. I think the mic's a bit too close, sorry. All right, so with emojis, we can play around a bit, okay? So, but obviously they don't originate in ancient Egypt because they were originally invented as emoticons. As emoticons, I'm sure you remember, you have a keyboard, and on your keyboard you can just do 2 dots and, you know, just smiley face, and that just works well. So it started with emoticons, okay, in 1982. Then, I don't know if you remember, if you used Microsoft Word, there was this font that was called Wingdings. So it was a font that whenever you convert it from PDF to Word, for example, you're like, what the hell is that, you know? Well, that was a prototype of today's emoji because it had both a smiley face and a sad face, but it was too complicated to use it. So when were emojis really populated? In 2010, okay? In 2010, because they were embedded in software in our phones, okay? And then we started using them broadly. Now they're everywhere in our emails, Slack messages, Microsoft Teams, wherever. Reactions can be quite tricky. I'll talk about it in a moment. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? There always has to be an agenda. So at first, we're going to talk about statistics, and more statistics, because I really want to prove you that the topic today is super important and that there is scientific research that proves that we have to acknowledge the power of emojis. So then we'll go to async communication. Async communication, previous panelists have spoken about it quite a lot today. Asynchronous communication, if you have a distributed team, then asynchronous communication is always the heart and soul. If you think that you don't have a distributed team yet, I'll tell you a little secret. If at least one person in your team occasionally works from home, your team is distributed. So definitely that's a topic for you. And then we'll go to intercultural traps and what we can do better. So the fun thing is that today we're a global village. We connect, we hire people everywhere, work from anywhere. There are different cultures. So the question is there a one-size-fits-all approach with emojis or not? Let's talk about it. Obviously, there will be traps. So think about the number of emails that you send per week. Do you have a number? Can you imagine a number? Think about it. So now, statistically speaking, every second email is misinterpreted, okay? That's what happens. So that means that you believe what you're telling others makes sense, but statistics prove 50% they got it totally wrong, okay? So now, let's go one step farther and let's take a look at a very simple word, okay. What does okay mean, okay? Okay can mean different things. The thing is that if we use nonverbal communication, right, so we send messages and also we are asynchronous, this can mean anything. So when you're receiving an okay response from someone, that means that someone's like, okay. Someone may be like, okay. Or someone may be like, okay. Or they may be submissive and they may be like, okay. You know? You don't know that. You really don't know it, all right? So now imagine that you are the sender. You're sending this message, you're writing about it, you're super proud of a project that you're doing, and someone responds with an okay. You're like, oh, they're neglecting me, you know? I've put so much effort into this, but the only response I get is an okay? Well, that could be different if we do it a bit of a different way. Okay, so I promised you statistics, so definitely there are more statistics. So remember a minute ago when I told you that 50% of emails are misunderstood, okay? So the worst thing is, it gets actually even worse, because 80% of senders believe that their messages are clear. So you're super convinced that everything that you're sending to people makes total sense, whereas every second message is misinterpreted, but 80% are like, no, totally not. So let's look at it this way. We're super biased, okay? And because we don't see our facial expressions, we don't see our gestures, we don't see our body language, we tend to think it's the way that we perceive it in this very certain moment. But that's actually not true. What's really even worse than all the statistics, and I don't mean to be super negative today, is the fact that as human beings, we always have a tendency to assume the worst, okay? So if you send a message that has absolutely no emotional intent, positive or negative, statistics prove that your receiver is going towards the negative direction, okay? So if you're trying to be super transparent, super objective, there is a very high chance that your message will be misinterpreted. And what's going to happen? So now let's imagine, if we have a tendency to assume the worst, like why is it that way? It all depends on how we feel. So again, let's go back to an asynchronous team. That means you're sending a message in the morning, someone gets it 2-3 hours later, and then you're like, okay, like what's really happening here? I already had a bad morning. I already had a bad week. For sure, this means something concerning, okay? And that happens if there is no emotional intent. So how can we overcome negative biases? Of course, we can overcome negative biases when we talk about emotions, okay? Because we're human beings, and that's our integral part of our life. So I don't know if you know the saying, I hope you do. If you don't, you'll just get to know it now. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So when we look at our brain from a scientific perspective, we will know that a picture we absorb very quickly, whereas when we have text, it takes us much more time, okay? So there was different research conducted that we had pictures and that we had written text, and we would immediately be able to understand what's in the picture, okay? So that is definitely something to take into account. And also another thing, when we look at emotions, when we look at emojis, the one side of our brain, the same part of our brain that is responsible for understanding emotions also processes images. So also emojis as images are being processed with that part of the brain, okay? So when we look at our plain written text, emotionless, and we add an emoji, we can have a win-win, right? Because we're having this emotional intent, and then this person knows, the receiver knows what it's about. Think about your culture as well. So today we're saying that, yeah, you know, everyone wants to have a great company culture. Everyone wants to be super transparent. How can you be transparent if you're emotionless? You can't be super transparent. How can you say you have a great culture? We're going to celebrate success. We're going to talk about failure. How can we possibly know this, and how can we emotionally engage in this amazing culture in a distributed team if we're not together all the time, if we're being emotionless? It doesn't make sense, right? And what's also interesting is the fact that many would say, when you also look at statistics, you're going to know that emojis tend to be misinterpreted, in most cases by people over 45 years old, because of the generation gap, okay? So when we now look at millennials and when we look at Gen Z, then emojis are being used super, super frequently. As a matter of fact, The total number of emojis is over 3,000. And if you want to know the exact meaning of emojis, there is a great source where you can go and you can check it out. It's called Emojipedia. In Emojipedia, yes, Emojipedia, yeah. So, and there you can figure out the exact meaning of an emoji, but there will be strings attached in a moment. So, let's look at it this way. 92% of the online population uses emojis today. So, if we're talking about the digital working era, if we're talking about a distributed environment, it doesn't make sense how old we are to think about it, but 92% is already there. I don't know if you know, but in 2015, the Oxford Dictionary published which word was used the most. It actually wasn't a word, it was an emoji. Crying, the fun crying face, right? And that was used like this. And also, I don't know if you know, but there is even a role that is called emoji translator. So people are even hired to do this, you know, because it's really becoming the so-called lingua franca these days, right? So emojis are this part that we interpret as emotional communication, okay? So it's the emotion that we can connect. All right, so now let's talk about asynchronous communication. So imagine a scenario that for sure happened in your life. So what is it? You get a message. You get the following message. We need to talk. Let me know when you're free. What does it possibly mean? A promotion? Not really. Okay. Yeah, probably it means something bad, right? Most probably we tend to interpret it the negative way, okay? So now let's think about it. Some of you here and some of our online audience, you're managers. What is your intention? How are you willing to make your people feel? Are you willing them to be scared of you and stressed out saying, oh, we have this amazing remote culture? Because they're sitting at home and waiting for a few hours for this meeting, being super stressed out and not even being able to work because something bad is going to happen, okay? So, and the interpretation of this message depends on various factors. So your intention that the receiver has absolutely no idea about, and the receivers, if they had a great flow, they've delivered a great project, they succeeded, they just got a promotion, they just met all their goals, everything is going to be like, yes, for sure, it's amazing. Most probably, as you've seen the statistics before, it won't. So you're going to be like thinking, what's going to happen next? And obviously, we can change this, right? We can change this if we talk about emojis. But if you now think that, yeah, you're going to try, we are super enthusiastic about making this happen, hold your horses, not yet. Because as much as we are a global village, okay, and we think that, yes, you know, we hire people anywhere, as I've said, from Asia, South America, Europe, Africa, North America, everywhere, Australia, yeah, that's amazing. There are traps. So when you go to Emojipedia and you check out all these emojis, you're going to see that they're mostly associated with the Western culture. So everything that you see in Emojipedia, it's going to be like, okay, we understand, we know that's towards the Western culture. But what if we have newbies that have never worked remotely in their lives and they're joining our amazing global team? So what can happen? This is one of the most common emojis, and it makes sense. I think that if you've seen the movie The Gladiator, right? If the gladiator was supposed to survive, it was like that. If not, then like this. As a matter of fact, it's not true. That was just invented for the movie, just so you know. But okay, again, in our Western culture, we say like, yes, that means that I'm approving something. But in some Mediterranean countries, and also in the Middle East, it actually means that you're being offensive. So if you have someone who's never worked with a Western culture, you're deciding to have team members there, that can be perceived as, I'm not going to speak it out loud, but imagine, okay? The second one is even worse. Clapping your hands, right? We're congratulating, makes sense, supernatural, amazing. Unfortunately, in China, it may not be associated with congratulating, but with, okay? And that's quite problematic, especially in the workplace. You don't want to say someone, you want to make love with them, right? Not really, okay? And make love is a nice word for what I've just done. So imagine, so that can be quite problematic, okay? It gets worse. An angel, we're innocent, right? We're sending someone an angel. Do you use that emoji? You send someone an angel, yeah. Again, in China, in some circles, it may be understood as, I'm willing that you die. I want you to die, right? Because an angel means death, okay? So you really have to be very careful. And here, last but not least, thank you or prayer, okay? It can be a thank you, but as a matter of fact, I don't know if you know, I'm repeating myself, Gen Z uses this as high five, okay? More frequently. Millennials and older generations will use this as a thank you, and some countries, Middle Eastern countries will use this to say that, yeah, I'm praying, okay? So, time to wrap up so that you capture the most important elements for today, So emojis help clarify emotional intent. We can't be emotionless, so think about it. Inside our companies, if you're building a great culture, we just need to connect. How can we connect remotely? Previous speakers have been talking a lot about offsites, how important it is to meet in person. Absolutely yes. But we also don't want to make it like, oh, when we meet in person, we connect on an emotional level, but if we're online, that we won't do it. So emojis are a great substitution of our facial gestures, body language, everything that we literally do that help us to be more connected in the digital working era. As I've said, they often speak better as words because our brain processes everything much, much quicker. And obviously, they help to express our facial expressions, right? So they display it, right? So if we are having a sync call with someone, so we see each other on video, we can immediately read this. I had actually a call last week with someone who was really stressed out, and I could see how they were, touching everything here, and I was like, oh, I see exactly what's happening. But if it was async, if it was written, I never would. But here, I would know the intention, right? So it's all about enhancing and humanizing our digital communication in this distributed work era. That's all on my end. Thank you so much.
Very much, Nadia. So probably in law school, you never thought you were going to do a keynote on emojis, right?
No, it was you who suggested the topic.
Well, yeah, because you had written a blog about this. So
That's
I was
very true.
super psyched, right? It's pretty brave, huh? Standing on stage, like hundreds of people watching, and you're going to have a talk about emojis.
But I'm actually, I live it now. I can feel it because it's quite, many emotions are associated with being on stage, so
That's really interesting, right? So can we pull up the Slido, maybe, if hopefully some questions came in. I also got one because, of course, although you've spoken about it super lively, and of course it's basically a hilarious topic, it's very, very important, right? And it's interesting if you compare, well, you said usually, like we human beings, we tend to absorb feedback in a negative way.
Yeah.
And especially if you do this in writing only, right? That's pretty sensitive. So key message probably is you see people adding to negative messages these emojis also to kind of brighten up the message, which is obviously not good. Should we do this, or how should you then communicate sometimes bad news? If you and I want to have a meeting, I do not have positive feedback for you. Should I just add a smiley to it and say, hey, shall we have a meeting? Smiley?
No, definitely
or how do I
not.
communicate this then?
No, then you're being fake, okay?
Yeah.
We don't want you to be fake. I think the most important element, if we really want to be very transparent, then we have to write a bit more, not just one sentence, let's meet, okay? That's number one. And number two, obviously, in an ideal world, if we manage a distributed workforce properly, then we have everything documented and all the processes, everything that we do, and also the workflows, and also our performance. So if a meeting is coming up with some feedback that is not so good, the question is, if we have everything planned appropriately, the person may already know, it's not going to be so fun because I didn't deliver. That may happen, but definitely don't use emojis to be like, so fun, but I'm just going to fire you today. Don't do that.
Smiley.
Don't do it. Yeah, I, as a matter of fact, I once had, when I was conducting an online interview with someone, it was a values-based interview, and one of the values was compassion. I have to say it, compassion. Like, how do you embrace compassion in this remote team? And they said, when I fire people, I'm being very compassionate because I'm doing them a favor because they don't qualify for this job. I'm like, well, not really. It's probably a bad example.
Very good. So, good question. Emotions towards customers, or absolutely not done?
It depends on the industry. So if you're dealing with someone that you know is really not into the topic, as I've said before, older generations are more likely to misinterpret them. So I would say when you send the first message, be kind of careful. Before you meet someone online, you see, connect, and then you can try. That's what I do. But on the other hand, if you check out someone LinkedIn's profile, it's full of emojis like, hey, they speak my language, let's just do it.
Very good. So next question, of course, I have to think of this example right away. Very good. There's room for misinterpretation. Does it mean that, despite the advantages that it also brings, and you've spoken about, should we be careful?
Yes, we definitely should be careful because sometimes emojis are also being interpreted as something negative, like I really want to keep a straight face to something that's unpleasant, and especially, as I've said, if you're working with people all around the world and some are new. So imagine now when we talk about remote work, if we talk about working from anywhere, it's not just a talent pool of people that know how to work remotely and they've done it for years. We will be hiring people that have never done this. They may not know how it is to work in an international environment. So there is definitely a huge problem with misinterpretation. So I would say towards Emojipedia, within your team, and say, hey, this is our culture, this is how we work.
And last question, don't you think emojis can also be considered quite passive-aggressive? Smiley. So.
Definitely, they definitely can be. And you know, I think that the story is a bit more complicated. So if you're really into emotions and emotional intelligence, there's something that I would really like to recommend you. There's something called, it's a methodology, it's called the SCARF model, invented by David Rock. And it shows us when we send a message to someone, we speak it or we write it, the person's reaction depends on their background, so to say. So I would definitely go towards that direction. And then if we understand each other, even if we are in a distributed environment, but we kind of understand how important emotional intelligence is, then we can play around with emojis properly.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, Nadia Harris.
Thank you.